Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to the keynote address for the 39th annual College Music Society Southern Chapter meeting. My name is Karen Foshheim. I am the regional president, and I am very happy to be here to welcome you and to introduce our guests for this morning. Each year, the Executive Committee of the College Music Society National Board mandates a national topic that will be addressed in all the regional and national meetings. This year, that topic is diversity and also inclusion. And that is a broad topic, and we'll discuss all the different ramifications of that as we go on in the next couple of hours. The College Music Society, by its very nature, is a society of equals. It's inclusive of all the disciplines in the musical arts, and it also recognizes the dignity of all those disciplines and all of our students and those involved. The topic of diversity and inclusion is particularly poignant in our current political and social climate. It seems we live in a world where suspicion is what we're all about. We're suspicious of those that are different from us. The stories that we tell as we frame our history really matter. What we say and the words that we use matter. And we are all looking for strong voices that can help us in those discussions. And the voice that we have today, Andre Dowell from the Sphinx organization, is one of those voices. And you can read his biography and he'll tell you all about what he does and also introduce the guest. But what I can say in my dealings with Andre in the past couple of months, every time we've negotiated something, he has said, what about my artists? What are we going to do for my artists? How can we present my artists? To me, that is a mark of a very strong leader, and he lives what he preaches. So please welcome to the stage, Andre Dowell.
Good morning. Awesome. You guys are so far spread out. Is it possible? Can we do something? Is that okay? Can we move closer? I'll feel more comfortable speaking with you instead of at you if we're a little bit more family cozy. Hi. Oh, this feels so much better already. You have no idea. So as you're moving forward, I want to first thank the College Music Society for inviting me to have a conversation with you today about diversity in the arts. I know it's close to lunchtime, and I hope that I can keep your attention this entire time, and I hope that you don't succumb to what I call the church head rock, where you do the nod and you're like that's the church head rock. I hope I can keep your attention this entire time. I hope that you get inspired about the work that we do at the Sphinx organization, and I hope that I can engage with you during this short time together and discuss challenges as it relates to diversity and what we can do to make a difference here collectively as a group. It's such a pleasure to stand before you today on behalf of the Sphinx organization, where I serve as the Chief Programming Officer. I greatly look forward to our brief time together and the conversations that we give life to that will continue outside of these walls, because these are things that are not easy to discuss and can sometimes be uncomfortable when we're talking about diversity. And that's okay, because when we reach that point of uncomfortability, that's where progress can be made. So I want you to know that it's okay if some of these conversations are completely uncomfortable. That is completely normal as we're talking about diversity. Before we delve into several things during our hour together, there are just a few additional group activities that we'll need to just get out of the way first before we get into any additional conversations. So the first group activity, and this is a very simple group activity, is there was music playing as you walked into the room. And just by a show of hands, how many people recognize that music? Okay. So, and that's okay, and that's why I play the music. It's actually one of my favorite composers. So who is the composer? The composer was Coleridge Taylor Perkinson, and the piece was called Sinfonietta Number 1. Coleridge Taylor Perkinson was an innovative American composer whose interests spanned the worlds of jazz, dance, pop, film, television, and classical music. This is Coleridge Taylor Perkinson. The music you heard was performed by a professional string ensemble. So as part of this first exercise, I just want people to kind of yell out adjectives that come to mind when you think of a professional orchestra. What are they wearing? What do they look like? What is the age group? Can people just yell out some of their own individual thoughts? Wearing black. That's a yes. Wearing black tuxedos or black dresses. Yes. Anything else? College grads, 40 to 50-year-olds, men, white. I'm hearing a lot of adjectives. Great. Those are all great. So as a group, we're going to just pick one adjective. We're just going to say it out loud all at the same time. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So, so the Sphinx Virtuosi is actually the ensemble that was performing that group, that piece. This is the Sphinx Virtuosi. It's one of the nation's most dynamic professional chamber orchestras, comprised of 18 of the nation's top Black and Latinx classical soloists. These alumni of the internationally renowned Sphinx competition come together each fall as cultural ambassadors to reach new audiences. This unique, self-conducted ensemble has earned rave reviews from the New York Times, being described as first-rate in every way, and the ensemble to have produced a more beautiful, precise, and carefully shaped sound than some fully professional orchestras that come through Carnegie Hall in the course of a year. That was the first part of our group activity. The second part is I'm going to ask help from Karen. I'm going to divide the group into 2 halves. 4 and 5. You group of 3 ladies and 2 people over here. You'll be part of group A, and the back half you will be part of group B. During this next exercise, how many show of hands? How many people are musicians, practicing musicians? How many teachers do we have in the room? How many are both entrepreneurs, non-musicians? 1, great. So for the most part, the majority in the room, you are musicians. If you need a piece of paper, please raise your hand. Karen is being so great to help with this exercise. There's a side A, which is the front half of the room. There's a side B, which is the back half of the room. And if you will indulge me in this very short exercise, for the first question, I'm going to ask side B, whatever you want to. I usually ask people to stand up and turn around while I ask the questions that will be projected on the screen. If you don't want to stand up and turn around side B, you can stay in your seats, but I ask that you just not look at what's on the screen. This is a very important part of the exercise. Side A, there's going to be a question that pops on this screen. I'm going to ask you to answer that question with your first instinct. There will be 2 questions. Just jot it down on a piece of paper. I'm going to ask help from this young man right here. Yes. What's your name, young man? Joel. Joel. I'm going to ask help from Joel if you could collect responses from all of A at the end of this exercise. And then for side B, Karen, I'm going to ask if you can collect the responses for the back half of the room.
Okay.
Sound great? Great, thank you. So with this first exercise, side B, I'm going to ask that you please either stand up and turn around or just not look at the screen for the purposes of this exercise. I'm going to put the question on the board in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the first, for side A, it's just a yes or no question. This is the question, and this is regarding so the answer to this question is yes or no. Here's the second question. So there's no right, no wrong answer. If you have no clue, take your best guess. I'll leave this question up for 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're done. So I'm going to ask my very good friend right here who we just met to collect these responses. Side B, you're still turned around. So side A, when you're done, I'll just have you stand up and turn around so that you don't see the side B question. Great. So I'm going to ask side B, if you will, to turn around. And it's a yes or no question. Again, we're all artists. It has to do with an artist B for the ensemble that you just heard that I I'll give you another 10 seconds to answer that. Just jot it down on your sheet of paper. 3, 2, 1. And this is your second question. Again, we're all artists. What about artists? Artists that come and perform for venues, etc. Give you about another 10 seconds for this. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're done. Thank you so much. Everyone can turn back on B. We'll come back to those results later in the presentation. Karen is going to go to the back and do some crazy math and give me some averages of everything that you've written down and the highs and lows of those. I mean, we'll get to see how that later in the presentation comes into play when we talk about unconscious biases. The last part of this exercise, and this is the last one, the last group activity, just think of any you would like to start, whether it's a music organization, a nonprofit, a for-profit. And I just want you, this is for yourself only. We're not turning this in. You can do this mentally. You can write this down on a sheet of paper. But I do want you to remember those 5 people because your answer will change by the time we're done with the end of this presentation. I want you to think of 5 people that you would want to be on your team for any organization that you're about to begin, whether it's a nonprofit, for-profit, orchestra, whatever have you, management company, school, whatever. Just think of 5 people, write those people down. If you don't want to write them all down right now, that's completely fine. We'll come back to that later in the presentation. Question, yes?
Do you mean specific individuals or like
yeah, specific individuals, names of people. Thank you for your help. I appreciate you. And thank you, Karen. I'll get those numbers from you later. Again, this is just the third part of this exercise, just writing down 5 people that you would want on your team, the top 5 people for any organization that you are about to start. We'll get to this point later in the conversation as well. We'll get, like I said, we'll get to that later. I'm gonna leave this up for another 10 seconds just so you can remember the question. So write down 5 people you trust who would you would want on your team if you started your own music program or whatever have you. Great. So before moving forward, and give you time to contemplate on those things, I do want to show just our very brief, a short Sphinx overview video. I'm going to ask for help from the booth in playing this video. This is about a 3-minute video that I would like you to see about our Sphinx organization.
The perception that the talent isn't out there within communities of color is so deeply false in classical music.
Wow, drop the mic. There are millions of kids like this in this country who do not have the resources to become everything that they could be. But fortunately, these programs are doing the job that the bigger society fails to do.
Sphinx's mission is transforming lives through the power of diversity in the arts. And we address the issue of lack of diversity and inclusion through a sense of a pipeline. We have Overture program replace violins in the hands of young people for the first time.
I definitely believe that the Sphinx Overture program has made a difference in this community.
The Sphinx competition is our flagship program. It's a wholesome approach to musician development that goes beyond the competitive mechanism.
Sphinx Connect is the epicenter for artists and leaders in diversity, devoted to the issues of inclusion, leadership, and career advancement.
We have Sphinx Symphony, which is a professional, all African-American and Latino orchestra. And then we have the Sphinx Virtuosi, which is an ensemble of soloists that performs across the country, everywhere from Carnegie Hall to Harris Theater in Chicago, and really communities beyond.
I think the Sphinx organization is so incredibly important. It tries to achieve in our society an equilibrium of people who are incredibly talented and motivated to be part of every aspect of our society.
Sphinx has done tremendous work over its first 20 years. And I think that over the next 20 years, Sphinx will truly transform the lives of millions of more people.
Change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. History will have the record that the greatest tragedy of this period was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. That is a quote from the great Dr. Martin Luther King, and it's something that I live by in terms of staying silent about things that matter. Diversity matters to me. It is the benefit of our environment when different perspectives, opinions, and viewpoints are not only expressed, but highly encouraged and nurtured. And that is why Sphinx Organization exists, is to create these different perspectives and these different voices and viewpoints that otherwise would not be expressed. So why is this so important to me? I'm from Tennessee. Actually, if you might hear a little bit of an accent. I've lived in Michigan now for the past 20-ish years after I became a student there at the University of Michigan. But I'm from Tennessee, and I actually started, as most musicians do from my community, started in the church. This is me at a very young age when I thought I wanted to be the world's greatest percussionist, and my mom bought me a little Smurf drum, and I knew right from that time that either I was going to be a Smurf fan or a drummer. I'm not sure, but I ended up being a percussionist, going to the University of Michigan, and really for a lot of people in our community, a lot of their first music experience comes from the church. And so I grew up in a Southern Black Baptist church in Tennessee. I remember the first day that my pastor wanted to know how he could help transition me to the next phase of my life because he knew that I wanted to be a percussionist. So I walk into church one day, and he had a drum set at church waiting for me and said, "Andre, we got you a drum set. Get up there and play." Now, I had never had a drum set lesson in my life. But the great thing about the church and the great thing about community, and that's one thing that's very important, is that you have to create a very nurturing community who's very supportive of whatever talents you're trying to bring up. It doesn't matter their starting point or wherever they come from, their background or whatever. So my pastor, the only thing he knew to do was to get me a drum set because I could play drums in the church and I wanted to be a percussionist. So that's what he did. I fast forward a few years later. This is my teacher, Julie Hill. And we talk a lot about the pipeline and taking students through pipelines, et cetera, things of that nature. How do you get more students in the pipeline? How do we get them private lessons? This is Julie Hill. She taught me for free throughout my entire high school career. Absent her teaching me for free, I would probably not be standing here before you today. She took me under her wings because she knew that her job at that point was she saw talent that she wanted to nurture. There's a lot of programs that we have that are diversity programs. There's a lot of funding that we wait until we get those types of funding or those opportunities in order to diverse whatever we're trying to do or build whatever we're trying to do. Whether it's diversity or whatever it is we're trying to do, we're usually bound by funding. But if you want to make a difference, you can make a difference. Simply put, if you want to make a difference. My teacher took me under her wing. I was the only person that she taught that she didn't take money from because I just couldn't afford it. But she wanted to invest in me as a student. She kind of took me through this pipeline where she taught me. She told me I should be going to the Interlochen Arts Academy. So this is a picture of me at Interlochen Arts Academy. You will see me up there, standing there. I'm the only African American in the cabin, and probably one of a very handful of people that attended Interlochen. It was actually at Interlochen where I first had the experience of being one of the only few people that kind of looked like me. And I was reminded of that because the reality is some of the people in my cabin would say that to me, that they didn't know any black people that were in classical music. And I kind of found that shocking and eye-opening because I came from a kind of a diverse community, but coming to Interlochen, it was kind of an eye-opener for me as an individual and a student trying to navigate that as I went through Interlochen Arts Academy. So that was kind of the first time where it was kind of an eye-opener to me. Kind of a little fun fact for anyone. Are there any Josh Groban fans out there by chance? People know who Josh Groban is? Yeah, that's Josh. So he was my bunkmate. He's the one sitting right in front of me, sitting down on the upper corner right in front of me. That's Josh Groban. He was my bunkmate back at Interlochen for eight weeks. That's a little fun fact. But that was Julie Hill. She introduced me to all these people. And there were more Josh Grobans in this picture that I had the opportunity to connect with and to learn from and to grow with as well. And to be able to fall back on when I needed someone to talk with. There were a lot of friendships that were established there. as well. Julie Hill brought me to Interlochen. She gave me words of encouragement, told me to go to college. This is something that she gave me when I graduated, which I don't think she realizes the impact of what it had in terms of words of encouragement for people that you're trying to encourage in whatever field. It was so small. She gave me a book to continue my college studies. And it says, Andre, a small graduation gift for a young man more precious to my soul than you can imagine. You have all the qualities you need to become anything you wish in this life, and I know it will be something great. I leave you with a little bit of a gift. But I don't think she realized the impact that this letter would have on me 20 years later to where I'm referencing it in a presentation. So as we're thinking about some of these things, remember that your words matter. Your words mean something. The things that you're doing right now, even in this room with the people that you're with right now, meeting different people and saying whatever words of encouragement or talking with them about anything are things that matter. And these are things that really help some of our conversations moving forward. Words matter, and these definitely matter to me. I'm proud to say that she had me at Interlochen. She taught me, had me at Interlochen, told me I need to go to the University of Michigan, where I'm proud to say I accepted a full scholarship at the University of Michigan, percussion scholarship. This is Michael Udow, who was my first teacher, who taught me a lot. I was in marching band while I was in college at University of Michigan Drumline. That's me in the upper corner. I premiered a concerto by Michael Dougherty. If anyone's familiar with Michael Dougherty's work, it's called Raise the Roof for timpani and symphony man. I premiered and recorded that piece. And the thing that I learned from that piece specifically was this. Because of who I was at the University of Michigan, where the population at that time wasn't as diverse as it is now. When I was done with their concert, there were literally people who came to me after the concert and just said, thank you for representing on stage, because I've never seen a musician of color at this level perform at that level. It was just something that was completely eye-opening to them. And this is something, that I will always remember, because I think like maybe, yes, I am the only one on stage, but every audience that I touch sees that only one, and something in them changes every single time. So every time they saw me on stage, there was something different that changed inside of them, so that when they saw something else, maybe their viewpoints changed just a little bit. And these are things that are important to me. And Karen mentioned before I came out that one of the things that I really pushed for was having artists here. And that's something that is very important to me in our organization, is not only to talk about it, but you have to see it and you have to experience it. And so we'll get to that much later. I have a young lady here, but we'll get to that much later. But those are important things. And no matter what judgments you had on me before this presentation, whether you were reading my bio or whether you saw me come out on stage, immediately there is some opinion that you have of whoever's in front of you. And if I can change your opinion for the better, hopefully, I've done my job in terms of changing viewpoints that much more. Whether it's good or bad, whatever judgment you had of me prior to me coming out will be completely changed, or at least somewhat changed, by the end of this presentation. Because you make judgments upon seeing people based on past experiences, which we'll get to later. And then you get to know people and what they're about and what they represent, and you have different opinions. So moving on, I eventually started a percussion trio, and we toured around the country talking about diversity in the arts and seeing artists on stage, which is why it's so important for me to have artists on stage. Michael Udow introduced me to a lot of opportunities, including the Sphinx organization, where as a student in college, I got to perform with the Sphinx Symphony Orchestra, who you saw in the video. This is a picture of the Sphinx Symphony Orchestra, where I got to perform with some of the nation's top Black and Latinx musicians across the United States. I got to meet Rainer Curl, who was a principal percussionist for the LA Philharmonic for so many years. I got to meet Mike Crusoe, who was principal timpanist for the Seattle Symphony Orchestra for so many years as well. But I had the opportunity to not only be mentored by these people, but I had an entire network that I never knew existed through the Sphinx organization. So now, serving in my capacity, how did I get to where I am today? Aaron Dworkin, who was the founder of Sphinx organization, took a chance, and we'll talk about qualifications later. He took a chance on a kid that had graduated from college who had a passion for the arts, I also have an engineering background, so I'm kind of analytical with things, but I also have an arts background. And he wanted someone in his administration. I had no qualifications whatsoever to be an administrator in the arts. Neither did I really know what an administrator did or was. Most people don't grow up wanting to be an administrator when they're in high school. What do you want to be? I want to be an orchestra administrator. No one really says that. They want to be the musicians performing on stage. But these were eye-opening opportunities for me because they weren't introduced to for me. And these are opportunities that you, people in this room, can create for younger generations in terms of teaching them, in terms of showing them what is actually possible. And for the younger students in here as well, yes, there's a career in the arts that's waiting for you if that's what you want to go into. So I feel compelled to give a quick summary of the state of our field. In our almost 20 years of service to the field of the performing arts, this is what the state of the American orchestras look like. We do a lot of work with American orchestras in the schools and summer programs. I want to talk about the stats of the American orchestras as they stand, and these stats are relatively within the past 2 years, 2016. So regular positions held by minorities in American orchestras. Overall, musicians of color represent over 4% of our American orchestras, with the rest being predominantly Asian and white. If we take a look at the minority representation in the national population, and this is important to know why the Sphinx organization exists. About 13% of the nation's population is black, and about 2% of orchestras are made up of black musicians. About 18% are Latinx citizens in the United States, and we have about almost 2.5% that make up American orchestras, and Asians make up about 6% in the population, and almost 7.5% in American orchestras. So I must clarify that Sphinx simply wants to achieve diversity within the performing arts, and we look at these stats to see where the issues lies and see what, and we see that while, for example, Asian Americans are overly represented in orchestras, Latinx and African Americans are the most underrepresented people in orchestra. And this comes from the U.S. Census from 2016 and a League of American Orchestra study from 2016 as well. As we look at these stats and we talk about everything, and we talk about, and I talk about my teachers who like put me on this path, and we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, we talk about these things, it's important to note that if we don't intentionally include, we can unintentionally exclude. And so that's why this work is so important. If we don't intentionally include, we can unintentionally exclude whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish. We see similar trends at the higher and administration positions held in American orchestras. Currently, 10% of music directors and conductors are Latino or African American. We have about 5% of education and community relations directors. And these are people, education and community directors. These are people who are physically going out into the community and making a difference. We see that it is about around 5%, 3% black, and around 2% Hispanic. We also see that with executive directors, a much less percentage, around 1.2% with executive directors. And then artistic administrators, much less, around 1%. So these are the stats of the field. And these are some of the hard conversations that you have to have when you're speaking about diversity and you're speaking about a lot of things, is what are the actual stats? And that's where the conversations should start. So there's much work to be done. Programming, which is why I played the piece by Samuel Closer Taylor Perkinson, is programming. So in the world, the overall top 10 composers, and if I ask the room, which I won't do right now, if I ask the room to shout out the top 2 or 3 composers, we'll get our standard answers. We'll get the Mozarts, we'll get the Beethovens, we'll get the Debussys, we'll get the Tchaikovskys. Yeah, there we go right there. Hailstork, yes, that's one right there. But we normally will get those top people. But in terms of programming, the overall top 10 composers in the world makes up 0% of the top 10 composers. So as things were like, okay, in the world, okay, what if we limit that to just the United States and Canada? So in the most frequently performed composers is still at 0%. So there's much work to be done. I heard you say Hailstork. There's lots of composers out there. I've introduced you to a composer. There's a lot of modern composers as well. There's lots of articles because of the month we're in. There's a lot of articles right now about up and coming minority composers out there. If that is of interest to you, you can definitely Google that and see what's out there as well. But again, these are the stats of our field. As you can see here, which is a little bit hard of a chart to read, so I'll just go over some of the things. By creating partnerships with orchestras across the United States in our first decade, Sphinx, we were able to increase the number of Black members in top-tier orchestras. Some of these orchestras have featured our competition laureates and also have members in their ranks. We like to celebrate what we've been able to achieve so far, and I like to share those with you. Prior to Sphinx, solo performances by musicians of color were extremely rare. And now there are over 30 performances each year by the Sphinx organization alone. And so thrilled to have Claire here, who is the music director for the Albany Symphony, who actually just featured one of our winners just almost a week ago as well, and contributing to these statistics as well. Never in the history has there ever been a Black and Latino touring orchestra. Now we have one every year. It's very rare to see or hear classical music performed by musicians of color. Now over 2 million in audiences every year get to hear and see this experience. We've increased the number of commissions by composers of color. Sphinx alumni have graduated from every top 10 music school and created the first intensive summer training program for Black and Latino string players. We've reached 85,000 students in over 200 schools, nearly $1.5 million in scholarships and awards. And we now see our Sphinx alumni launching community initiatives through our Empower grants, where we have granted over $1 million in the past 4 years to just over 50 projects for our artists to take on their own entrepreneurial endeavors. While these are important benchmarks, we've seen that there is much work to be done, and at Sphinx we must act now because we cannot be silent about the things that matter. So I want to talk about approaching diversity, and I hope Karen might have the stats almost ready. You do? Great. I'm gonna ask that you bring those up just for now. I want to talk about approaching diversity and recognizing, first of all, unconscious biases. So I had everyone participate in this exercise. Thank you so much. And I don't know these answers yet. This is B. Great. So this is just about creating unconscious bias. So everyone uses their past experiences to make a quick judgment call about whatever it is. Again, I have not seen these numbers, so I don't know how this is going to turn out right now. But basically what I did in the exercise is I gave everyone a starting point, and then I asked everyone the same second question. So the group A, it was, did you think this group cost this much? And that's kind of the irrelevant. That's the setup. That was your setup. Whether the answer was yes or no is irrelevant. The second question was, how much do you think this group costs? And the average cost of the ensemble was $2,507. The lowest amount that was given was $30. And the highest was $10,000. So that was Group A. Group B, the average cost of the ensemble was $38,950. The highest end was $120,000, and the lowest end was free, actually. Otherwise, it was $5,000. So next from free was $5,000. But I'm looking at these numbers. It's free, 5,000. It jumps to 10,000, 15, 50, and then so forth and so on. Going back to side A, we're looking at 30, 100, 150, 50, 300, 3,000. So even in this room, how did I, the magician, have the room have such vastly different answers? Anybody have a guess? I'm sure, has anyone done this exercise before? No. So there are some. Yes. So yes, exactly. It's the setup with the first number that I gave you. So the first number for Group A was, and I have to go back, but I think it was $10. Do you think this group cost $10 to present? I got 16. Or do you think this group costs more than $10? I got 16 yeses and 1 no. And so the setup was your starting point was $10. And this is important because everyone in their life has a starting point. No matter where their starting point is, whether you come from a privileged family, whether you had supporters when you grew up, whether you went to this type of school or that type of school, whether you had resources to you or available, the important thing with this exercise is everyone in this room for this one particular moment in time had the same starting point, and the answer that the average answer was $2,507. So the second question to Group B was, do you think this group costs more than $100,000? And we got 6 yeses and 15 nos, again, with the average of $38,950. Again, the point of this exercise is to realize that when you divide people into different groups and they have different starting points, the outcome, no matter what it is, the outcome on an overall scale will always be vastly different. And I've proven that in this very short exercise where everyone in this room, except for one, is in the arts and is a musician. And are completely aware of artist fees. This is important in terms of recognizing unconscious biases. I want to before we get into that, I want to talk about diversity, because we talk about diversity and the actual definition, Webster's definition of diversity. The condition of having or being composed of different elements. At its very root, that is diversity. Being composed of different elements. The inclusion of different types of people, such as people of different races or cultures in groups or organizations. Programs intended to promote diversity in schools. The second definition, an instance of being composed of different elements or qualities. And at its very root, when we talk about diversity, the only thing that we're talking about are being composed of different elements. So I want to make sure that we're starting from the same point when we're talking about diversity and we're talking about unconscious bias. So again, unconscious bias talks about why do we have unconscious biases? It's a rhetorical question, but it keeps us safe. It's a human danger detector. As I said earlier, if we don't intentionally include, we can unintentionally exclude, because our brains are wired to think a certain way based on our past experiences. Qualifications for jobs, for example, these are biases. I gave the example of myself. If the Sphinx organization put out a job description and you had to have qualities X, Y, and Z, I would not have fit that description, because society tells us that you have to have a degree, you have to have done this, you have to have done X, Y, and Z in order to do this job. So even when we think about job applications or whatever it is, we need to think about how these are affecting exactly what we're doing and what kind of long-term implications and who are we excluding when we put these things out. I didn't, at the time they approached me, I didn't have my master's. I had no administration experience whatsoever. There was no reason except for he is focused on diversity and he is focused on including what other people may exclude. And so he took me in and taught me and kind of helped me get that position. But these are just examples. Taking previous experiences. Having unconscious bias, it is not curable. It's just a fact. It's not curable, but you can address it once you realize what your biases are. What would the world look like if everyone were aware of their biases? That's something to think about. If everyone were aware of their biases, what would this world look like? We have a responsibility to understand the assumptions that we are making, the biases that exist within us, because they do exist, whether we want to recognize them or not. I have them, you have them, Aaron Dworkin has them who helped me. Everyone has their own biases. But how can we eliminate sources of potential biases And if you're not conscious, if you're not aware of your biases, then you are not contributing at this higher level in which we are trying to achieve. So we need to be aware of our biases and embrace and understand diversity. We've talked about the definition diversity. The third part of one of the exercises that I had you do, and this is just for you only, was to write down 5 names of people that you would want when you started your own organization. Now, whether you wrote that down or if you have it in your head, totally fine by me. The point of the exercise is for you to take that list home with you following this session and understanding, what does this list look like and what does this list say about my biases? Do I have all men on my list? Do I have all women on my list? Do I have all whites on my list? Do I have all blacks on my list? Do I have all older people? Do I have all younger people, et cetera, et cetera? Think about the list and the people that come to your mind and ask yourself, am I creating a diverse environment? When we talk about diversity, these are real questions that we must ask ourselves. Where is my bias and what am I doing? We talk about knowing the stats and creating visuals. One stat that I find particularly intriguing is when we talk about equality and equity. I saw this at a conference before. I'm sure some of you have seen this before. This slide here. This is talking about equality. We see a family. I see some head nods. Some people have seen this before. I'm sure there are some who have not seen this before. We talk about equality. This is a family. You can see they're different heights. We talk about making everything equal. And we talk about making things equal when we talk about diversity, when we talk about just education in general. But the reality is that everything can't be made equal if we want to create this diverse and equal opportunity for everybody. So we see that everyone equally has a box to stand on trying to look over the fence. And you can see that no matter what, because we're treating them all as equals, by default, some will have advantages and some won't have that same advantage. This is just a visual that I like to keep in mind as I go throughout my everyday work. So this is equality, when we talk about equality. Now, when we talk about equity, which is quite different, some people need a little bit of extra help to be able to be on that same playing field. We have a responsibility to recognize those individuals who require additional help and assistance. We have a responsibility, everyone in this room has a responsibility to ensure that we're putting everyone on this same level. This is an example, very clear example of equity. We also know that in order to advance, a lot of the times it's about what? It's about who you know. And so this is the reality of a lot of what we're doing in the arts, and something that we're trying to stop is the reality of the situation, which is the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And so these are the 3 images. This is a visual that I like to create for myself when I'm talking about equality and the equity and the reality of things that we're doing in our everyday lives. So we've talked about biases, we've talked about diversities, we've talked about stats. Next thing I want to talk about is just networking and mentorship. As I said, my teacher from high school was helping me to network and navigate this road called classical music. And she made sure that I got from point A to point B, where I was getting lessons just to have access, and then able to network and get to Interlochen, where I met a tremendous amount of people, to where I was then introduced to the University of Michigan, to where I was then introduced to Aaron Dworkin, to where I was then able to stand here and be able to stand before you and talk about diversity, something very passionate to me. So when we talk about networks and we talk about mentors, everyone in this room can be a mentor to someone if that is your agenda. And that's important to realize. And something that we have a responsibility in terms of ensuring that we're taking people from point A to point B to point C and through this entire pipeline, and not just handing them off to the next pipeline and hoping that they do well all by themselves. We have to be able to create this network and this environment for them. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is simply taking actions And this is the last thing before we have our soloist come out and perform, and then we'll break soon. But the last thing I want to talk about is just taking action. I mean, I talked about taking action, and I've talked about my mentors, et cetera. This is my own personal story. I'm sure everyone can relate and has their own story as well. But in terms of taking action, like I said, my pastor who knew my desires just one day was like, how can I help? What can I do? I don't know. We have a choir, and sometimes, they have drum sets in church. I'm going to buy a drum set, and he's going to come here, and he's going to play, and he's going to feel supported. And I know that I have done my small part in ensuring that his goals and dreams can be realized. These things are important in terms of taking action. And then also, what are some conscious things that you will take back to your team or your field or your everyday work from these exercises that we've done today? And what are your biases, and how will you implement that into everything that you're doing? And how will you put those things into action? Taking action, one of the very important aspects of talking about everything that we do with diversity, recognizing biases, embracing, understanding the definition of diversity is just different perspectives. Knowing the stats, creating a visual is important to help you kind of see and realize. When I showed all of the stats earlier, and you see 0% and you see 1 or 2%, those are stats, and those are sometimes uncomfortable conversations. But the reality is, those are the stats, and that's not something that we can hide from. Networking and mentoring, knowing who to set people up with, those things are important, and taking action as well. I want to, just for a brief moment, I know that we'll have time, a little bit of time later, but I want, if there's anyone in the room who wants to talk quickly, or just talk quickly about any observations or changes that you've made internally, even from the beginning of this conversation, recognizing biases and judgments, and to where you might be shifting, or even if someone wants to stand up and recognize what their own biases might be. I did this exercise before, and the entire room wanted to stand up. We don't have time for that. I don't think we do. But the entire room wanted to stand up and recognize their own biases because they wanted it out, and they felt free doing it. It was a kind of environment where they were asking for help in terms of recognizing their own biases. Now they were a little bit different because they were a community of people, and it was a work group, so we were kind of in a room of strangers, so it might not feel as comfortable. But I do want to leave that opportunity and space, and no one has to get up. But if there's anyone that just wants to get up and say even a short, I see a lot of smiles, so I don't know if that means you're going to get up or you're thinking about it, or you might get up and you're not, I don't know. But I'll leave the opportunity right now for anyone that just wants to get up and share anything briefly. Yes, right here.
That wasn't the first thing that came to mind. Who has the power? People like me, I didn't pick many because it's my bias. We're not over major record labels. We're not, we're not this. So I just want to put that out. I had to put myself out there. I'm a little ashamed of that. No women, no Latino, no Asian, no young people. I got work to do.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That is actually courage, and that is vulnerability. I mean, he was in a very vulnerable state to be able to share that with I don't know if they're complete strangers to you, but I'm sure there are some strangers in the room. And I want to encourage us. I know that we're gonna go into lunch here in just a few minutes. I want to continue the conversation. When we're in the lunchroom, If you're comfortable sharing with your table your biases, great. If not, great. Like I said, these conversations sometimes are uncomfortable, and that's completely okay. Before we do that, I want to leave you with a quote. Um, First, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And so these conversations are important. Make sure that you're approaching them from a great place in terms of how you're making people feel and approaching these conversations, because they are very difficult conversations to have. My contact info for those of you who want it, and then we'll get to Hannah White. I want to introduce Hannah White, who has been described as delightful, a violin prodigy who brought smiles and chuckles to the audience by the Chicago Splash, and a dose of hope for the future, pure talent approaching perfection to transport you to a magical place, a national violin virtuoso by the Milwaukee's Journal. She has performed as a soloist at Carnegie Hall and has performed as a soloist with major symphonies across the nation, including the New World Symphony, Detroit Symphony, Cleveland Orchestra, Buffalo Philharmonic, several other orchestras, including our very own here, Albany Symphony Orchestra, just almost a week ago. Please join me in welcoming Hannah White. Isidore?